that recording? Yes. Right, we're going to go ahead and get started in about a couple of minutes as we get all of our people logged online by Zoom. All right, thank you all for attending in person and for those that are attending with us virtually through Zoom. I want to welcome you to the February general membership meeting. My name is Chastity Vega, I'm the CEO with GOBA. And at this time, is there a veteran in the room with us? No? Jeff, will you lead us into the pledge, please?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And I'm sure by now you have seen all the notices surrounding the buildings that while you're seated and eating at your comfort level, you can have your mask on or off, but in walking through common areas, please always wear your mask for the comfort and safety of all of those in the room today with us. I want to recognize our senior officers. It is not an easy job to take time out of your own business nowadays to lead the association in these times. But I do want to recognize Rick Cacavello is your president this year, and he is here with us today. Monaco is your vice president, and Thad Lynch is your secretary treasurer. Also, at the same time, and putting countless volunteer hours in, is your board of directors. If you are a member of the GOBA board or even the GOBA Foundation board, please stand to be recognized. And you'll hear this message being told throughout the year. And while our membership remains strong, the only way to push the initiatives of the association is by your contributions and your dollars put towards all of our meetings and events. They not only help us thrive at those events and what we do, but they also support the mission and allow us to advocate on behalf of the industry. So this year, in 2020, we had 12 corporate partners, and it is amazing and such an accomplishment this year to have 16 corporate partners dedicated to the mission. They deserve all of our business and our accolades. So with that, let me announce Allied Building Solutions. I know Chad is here. Barry Neal, Floor and Home, and Christine is here with us. Central Kitchen and Bath. With CenturyLink. Engineering. Custom Concrete. FDS Engineering Associates. James Hardy, and I know John Mancini is here with us. Steve Associates. Mid-Florida Credit Unions. Juan and Tony are here as well. Toll Brothers as your 2021 Parade of Homes Showcase Home. And one of my favorites, Trustco Bank. So again, please find a way to do business with them, and we will promote them all year long to you. So thank you for all your support and contributions, corporate partners. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Amanda Bradshaw, who's your Membership and Communications Director.
Right, good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm going to start off by thanking some of our sponsors for today's GMM. I'd like to start with thanking our platinum sponsors, Trustco Bank and Dave Schmidt Engineering. I'm going to invite Louis to come up and speak on behalf of Trustco.
Thank you, everybody, giving me the opportunity to come on up. This is, I think, probably one of my favorite things that we do here. I always look forward to listening to you speak. Just a real quick moment, if you're not familiar with Trustco Bank, we've been around since 1902 out of upstate New York. We specialize in residential mortgages. We are portfolio lenders. Never ever sell our loans. With Trustco Bank, there's never any borrower paid PMI at all, even with 3% down. We have very, very low costs, no appraisal fees whatsoever, no points. There is no real estate escrow involved on our side, just principal and interest payments. And then we do 90-day rate locks on all of our loans. On new construction loans, we do 330-day rate locks at time of application. On our building loans, our loan to value is 84.5%, one closing up front with an 8-month build time, interest only payments during that time. And then at the end of that 8 months, we automatically convert over to a standard mortgage with no additional paperwork. So if you'd like any more information about that, we'll be in the back of the room at the end. I'd love to speak with you about it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Louis. Our next platinum sponsor is Dave Schmidt Engineering. Dave, would you like to come up and say a few words?
Go Gators.
Go Canes. Are you Canes? We're gonna have a good year. Thank you for attending this great luncheon today. And we just want to let you know that we're a full service civil firm in Orlando, doing work all over Central Florida. Even through COVID, we've had a very successful 2020 and a very good start to 2021. And our whole niche in the market is to be the most timely and responsive civil firm. And I think that's why we've been successful. But just a quick thank you for coming and supporting the GOBA missions that we are out to support. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Dave. Next up, we are going to thank our gold sponsors, Allied Building Solutions, Central Kitchen and Bath, Castilla Associates, and FES Engineering. Today's bronze sponsor is James Hardy, and our Zoom sponsor is CenturyLink. Not happen without your sponsorship dollars. So thank you again for your support to the association. Please take some time to go thank these sponsors personally and do business with these industry supporters. All right, is there any new members in the house today? Brand new member, new members? All right, well, I was gonna put you on the spot and make sure that our current members welcome you today. So, all right. We probably have some on the line in Zoom. All right, make sure that you're following our calendar for some upcoming events. We do have some exciting things happening. This week, Ricardo has a Developers Council webinar. Next week, we'll have a Young Professional Social over at Tuffy's Bottle Shop and Lounge in Sanford, Florida. The following week, we do have a joint building committee meeting here. It will likely be a limited attendance with a Zoom addition to it. We have a Custom Homes and Remodeling Council Healthy Home Technology program that will take place towards the end of the month. And lastly, we have a Topgolf networking event that we are going to host at the brand new Topgolf in Lake Mary's. So if you haven't registered already, please do. On that note, right now is Parade of Homes season. Cherry is in the back and she has just opened up registration recently. We have some great early bird discount pricing. And, you know, I thought it would be interesting to let you guys know that it's not just new homes that are going in. There are a ton of categories. The custom homes, single family, multifamily. Remodels, specialty design, includes interior design, kitchen and bath, pools and spas, and landscaping. Additionally, we have communities and apartments. This year, we have a $100,000 marketing value plan in place. So you do get a lot out of the Parade of Homes year round. If you have any questions, make sure you go see Cherry in the back. Next up, if you guys have not already signed into our jingle, please text GOVA to 407-537-5536. We utilize this platform to keep communications active with all of you members on important updates. So if you haven't done so already, please do this to enroll in our free service. It's a moment. Dr. Sean Snape is Director of University of Central Florida's Institute for Economic Forecasting and is nationally recognized economist in the field of business and economic forecasting. It is my honor to welcome him back here to GOVA, Dr. Sean Snape. I'm gonna switch over the screen.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I guess first off, Happy New Year. But I think I need to address the elephant in the room and on the Zoom, my hair. You might feel as, you know, you sort of have been sold a false bill of goods here. My headshots, of course, haven't been updated. And I haven't had a proper haircut since February of 2020. And, you know, part of it was a COVID lockdown, right? My hair guy was shut down for 5 months. So, I mean, it wasn't really by choice. I wasn't going through any sort of 2/3 life crisis or something like that. I didn't get a sports car. I still have my 2008 Sequoia out there in the parking lot. So, you know, 5 months went by and I don't know how you feel about it, but pandemics are kind of boring. You know, no travel. I'm just sitting in my office all day, and sometimes I go to the bed and get something to eat, and then back to my home office. And I bought a bird feeder that, you know, I hung outside the window there, something to do. And then with the hair, it just became something out of boredom. I mean, I effectively have turned myself into a breathing chia pet. So I'm just watching my hair grow, and it's like, look how long it is now. And so that's how it started. But I've spent a lot of time alone before the pandemic as well. But I started thinking about it. You know, it's tough being an economist, very competitive field. You know, it's hard to get speaking engagements. Fortunately, y'all are desperate. But, you know, it's very competitive. Birthdays, bar mitzvahs, and so forth. You know, a lot of economists working to get those gigs. And so I'm like, I gotta make myself stand out. So I was doing some brainstorming during this pandemic. I thought, maybe I'll just rebrand myself. You know, kind of stand out from the rest of these other nerds, and you know, maybe get my profile a little higher. And so I thought, well, if I keep letting my hair grow, you know, maybe I could become the Fabio of economics, right? I mean, there's no Fabio of economics out there right now. It's pretty novel. And so, you know, I had some PR people, you know, work on what our forecast might look like going forward. You know, experience the unforgettable ecstasy in this forecast, right? I mean, that's a little more eye-catching than, you know, Florida forecast. So, there's another, I think they did another draft here. Yeah, scandalous GDP. And now these are still rough sort of, you know, sketches and so forth. And I didn't have a lot of money to spend on the drafts there, but I was a little disappointed that they used Weird Al Yankovic in the background scene there. And I don't, you know, he's got a parasol there. I don't know. So we have some work to do. I have some work to do. You know, the hair part of my transformation is relatively easy. I mean, I did have to buy a hair dryer for the first time in my life. I do shampoo and condition. The Moroccan Aragon oil, by the way. But the rest of the transformation is going to take some more time. The body part, you know, I'm not really up to that Fabio level. In fact, the other day I was getting out of the bathtub, and I know there's been a lot of snafus on Zoom and so forth that cost people jobs. But I looked in the mirror, as I was getting out of the tub, and what I saw was a bit shocking. And I took a selfie. I'm going to share it with you. I looked like an avocado pit that somebody was trying to germinate. I mean, I had these skinny little limbs in this round body, so I got a long way to go before the whole Fabia thing. But that's long story long. That's why my hair has been growing out. I heard some of the wonderful members of GOVA were talking a little smack about my forecast last time we met in February. How I didn't predict the whole COVID thing and all that. Yeah.
They blamed you?
Of course they did. I was right. There should have been a recession in 2020. And if there was, it would have been a very mild one. Because this recession was a recession like no other. This recession is historic in a number of ways, the recession 2020. It's historic in terms of its cause. This was a public health induced recession. The government basically dictated that, I don't know if anybody in this room fell into this category, but some businesses were non-essential and should be shut down immediately. And so just like that, the output, the goods and services that those companies were producing dropped immediately to zero. This is not how recessions typically begin. Now, they're a more gradual process generated from within the economy typically. Some weakness in the economy or some overheating sector begins to cool. You might have a shock externally, a currency crisis or a stock market plunge or collapse of the dot-com bubble that can help knock the economy further into recession, but that wasn't going on this time around. In February, the economy was in fantastic shape, particularly so here in Florida. Maybe the best labor market in the state's history, quite frankly. And it wasn't being driven, as was the case in 2005, 2006, by a housing bubble, effectively. This was an across-the-board strong economy that was driving the unemployment rate down in February to below 3%. It doesn't really get much better than that as far as the labor market. And then the lockdowns were implemented and the economy plunged into a historic recession. I used to call the 2008-2009 recession, which is also known as the Great Recession. I used to refer to that as the recession of a lifetime. But I guess I lived too long because 2020, it turns out, was actually a more severe recession than the 2008-2009 recession. It was much deeper than that recession was, although both were, as we know, quite severe. It's historic as well, the 2020 recession, because I believe it will go down as the shortest recession in U.S. history. There's a think tank called the National Bureau of Economic Research in Massachusetts, and they have a committee that puts dates on the turning points of the business cycle. So the business cycle, we go through an expansion, we hit the peak of that expansion, then we go into a contraction or recession, we hit the trough of that recession, the recession ends, we begin the next expansion. And so that is part and parcel of any economy. So they put dates on those points, the peaks and the troughs. And when they do that, they define the beginning and the end of recessions. Typically, it takes them 12 to 18 months to make the declaration about when a recession began. Now, you can insert, you like to bash economists around here. You can insert an economist joke. But part of the story here is data. The data about the macroeconomy gets revised over time. It gets benchmarked annually. And so they don't have the final data often until 12 or 18 months after the fact. And so they don't want to prematurely date the recession, so they typically wait. That didn't happen this time. It was 2 months after the recession started that the NBER came in and said, yeah, the economy hit its peak in February. That meant that as of March and April, we were in recession. And as I said, there was really no reason to wait for the final data. This was not an ordinary recession. This was a public health induced recession. And so there was no uncertainty whatsoever. And so with every recession, the discussion always goes to, well, what's the recovery going to look like? And that's when all the alphabet soup descriptors, come out from economists. Is it going to be a V-shaped recession and recovery? Is it going to be a U-shaped recession and recovery? An L-shaped? A W-shaped? This time around, I don't know, Nike apparently got to a few economists, and some of them were saying a Nike swoosh recession and recovery. I'm calling it a bent V recession and recovery. I think that the recession ended in May. If the NBER said June, I wouldn't be surprised by that. But very clearly looking at the preliminary data, once the lockdowns ended, once most of the country said, hey, you can open up your business, you can go back to work. Well, guess what happened? The output of the economy rose. It rose dramatically at 34% or so in the third quarter, after declining by 31% in the second quarter. I don't think it's a V-shaped in the purest sense of the word, because that implies a certain symmetry between the recession and the recovery. So I think the recovery, while steep, is not going to be exactly as steep as the recession was that preceded it. But it is ongoing. We saw 4% or so growth in the fourth quarter. And I think a lot of this is being powered by the consumer. Pent-up demand. And I used to worry, sometimes I still do, but in 2020, I was worried that they were going to re-implement these lockdowns, that we would go back to March and April. And if that had been the case, of course, we would have instantly gone into recession. But I think it would have been a worse recession and bordering on a depression, because the damage that was done the first time would have been compounded by a second round of lockdowns. And thankfully that hasn't happened yet. And it seems like we're coming to our senses collectively here about, how these policies don't make much sense from a cost benefit analysis. And I think historically, we'll look back on this as one of the biggest policy mistakes we've ever made in this country in terms of dealing with the COVID-19. Consumers, as I said, I think are going to power this. Let me come back to that. I want to talk a little bit about the labor market, because of the unprecedented nature of this recession. The labor market also behaved in an unprecedented way. Typically, the labor market lags behind the overall economy. So, in your businesses, if you have a slow couple of months, a slow quarter, where revenues are down from the previous quarter, your first reaction isn't to start laying off staff. Was it a bump in the road? Let's wait and see. Oh no, we've got 2 quarters in a row where things are slowing down. And then you start to have to think a little more deeply. So usually these decisions about layoffs occur with a lag to the overall economic activity, but there was no uncertainty here. I have to shut down my restaurant. I don't need any workers. It's pretty simple. And so the labor market moved in sync with the overall economy. And so we saw payrolls in the United States drop off dramatically. 35 million people, 36 million people over an 8-week span were thrown into unemployment. And typically, not only does the labor market lag the overall economy, it's more gradual in its movements. You can see here, with the 2008-2009 recession, quarter to quarter, yeah, this was a bad recession too, but it was a gradual decline in payrolls. This was just, fell off the cliff because the mall was shut down. You don't need anybody to work there. You're all furloughed, you're all laid off. There's nobody working. Nobody, the theme parks are closed. You don't need employees if there's no guests, and so on and so forth. One thing I do want to point out nationally that and I've been talking about this for 8 or 10 years, is the national debt, which is now 27.6, maybe 7. I didn't look at the clock this morning. $1 trillion on what was pre-pandemic a $22 trillion economy. And so the debt to GDP ratio, at Trustco Bank, when I go in or your business goes in to get a loan, they're going to look at your debt to income ratios as a gauge of your trustworthiness as a borrower. Sovereign debt, sovereign borrowers, countries are a little bit different than you or I or individual businesses, but an analogous measure would be the debt to GDP ratio, which gives you a sense of how the ability of a country to service a certain level of debt. And so back in 2010, Greece, their debt crisis came to a head. Very devastating to the economy. They had to cut the equivalent of Social Security payments to people who were already retired. A lot of bad things happened. Their total debt at the time was $380 billion. That was the total debt. I think we just ran that up since I came on stage here in the United States. I mean, that's chump change around these parts. But the ability of Greece to service that amount of debt, because their economy is so small, is what precipitated the crisis. And so their debt to GDP ratio was about 185, 190%. So they were in way over their head. In the US now, it's about 130% debt to GDP. A record, previous record was 107, 107% debt to GDP, and that was coming out of World War II. You know, we're not coming out of a world war here, and yet we're continuing to run up the debt. Still being discussed another $1.9 trillion stimulus bill on top of this. And so it's very likely that by the time we get to the end of 2021, the national debt could hit $30 trillion. It's a problem, despite what politicians would say, and despite there are some fringe elements of the economics profession that have been espousing this notion that debt doesn't matter, that the government can run up as much debt as it likes. At the same time, there are people espousing things like Medicare for All, the Green New Deal, all of these which carry tens and tens of trillions of dollars in terms of price tax. Not to mention these little entitlements we have called Social Security and Medicare as they exist today, which are actuarially and demographically going to fail if changes aren't made. And so all these things are coming together, and it's increasingly a concern to me. And so I've been adding this to my talks. There's a line, and I probably told you this before, out of The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway. There's two characters, Bill and Mike. They're discussing Mike's bankruptcy in a bar. Bill says to Mike, Mike, how did you go bankrupt? And Mike said, well, two ways. Gradually, then suddenly. And that's the thing with debt crisis. You don't get a 10-year warning. You don't get a 15-year, hey, you need to do this, this, and that. It just creeps up and then boom. And the consequences of this are incredibly dire. The housing market. It's funny, they're busting my chops about my forecast. I've been here 5 years at least telling you to build more. You never listen. It's just like my daughters. In one ear, out the other. Dad, why do you keep talking? That's what one of them said to me today. Why do you keep talking? I don't know, kid. I don't know. But the housing market, we have the same problem now that we did pre-pandemic, and that is a lack of supply. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that data. But mortgage rates fell to incredibly low levels. The Fed is likely to keep short-term interest rates low for the next 3 years. But long-term rates, if you've noticed, are starting to creep up. Is it the concern over the debt? Is it the level of the debt itself? Who knows? Inflation hasn't really reared its ugly head. But there was a short disruption, of course, for the couple of months during the pandemic. What do you do in the housing market in terms of sales and so forth? But, I think that we got out of 2020 with a 3.5% decline in GDP. And I mean, all things, total there, that's probably not a bad outcome, given the silly policies that we implemented. That's why. So, and this is why I was wrong. This is why I was wrong, Chastity.
You were wrong.
No, I was wrong in predicting what these fools were going to do. There goes my thought train. How's my hair? Thank you. 3.5% down, not bad, given that we shut down the economy for 2 months, basically. And in some states, they're still under incredible restrictions to this day. And you know, there's a whole host of issues, not the least of which is who bore the brunt of all these measures? Who took it on the chin the worst in the U.S. economy?
Small income.
Small business and low income households. How'd old Bezos do during this stuff? Pretty good. Pretty good. It's a little guy and gal that took it on the chin. But yeah, I couldn't believe that they were going to do this. Now I understand early on we didn't know a lot about the pandemic. Right? China was not exactly forthcoming about what was going on in the Wuhan province. And the World Health Organization was more concerned about how we would refer to the flu as opposed to, you know, fighting this global pandemic. You know, we couldn't refer to it as the Wuhan flu. That was, you know, just bad for a whole variety of reasons. And then I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Lyme disease, Spanish flu, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, Middle East respiratory syndrome. What else am I missing here? They're always named over where the origin of the disease was, but that's what they're worried about. So, okay, we didn't know a lot. Then we get a bad forecast, another one, not mine, out of the UK saying there was going to be 2.2 million deaths in the United States in 2020. Well, that was a shocking number, right? And so immediately politicians, you know, sort of sprung into action and said, okay, we've got to flatten the curve. Do you remember that? It was 2 weeks. 2 weeks, we're going to shut things down. We're going to flatten the curve. We don't want our healthcare system to get overwhelmed. All right, that's reasonable given the lack of information. And then 2 weeks became 2 months and much longer in many parts of the country. And the healthcare system was never overwhelmed, even in the worst, you know, regions in the United States. So given what we did to get out of 2020, only 3.5% down, not bad. I think this year, 5.4%, maybe higher growth in GDP. Again, the consumers, I believe, are powering this. We talk about pent-up demand in economics. Whenever you're in a recession, even if your business or your job, your income is unaffected by the recession itself, people tend to withhold spending. You know, they don't get the new car in the middle of the recession, or they, you know, postpone the vacation. They don't redo their kitchen or buy big ticket items. You know, they tighten their belts, even if their income has been unaffected. That pent-up demand is being released. In this recession, I'm referring to it as pent-up demand squared. Because we've got this traditional pent-up demand, spending that didn't happen during the recession, but we were also pent up, literally, in our homes with the people that were formerly known as our loved ones. And the desire to get out and to do things again and get back to normal, I think, is very, very strong. And the vaccines were a big hurdle to cover to help reduce the fear. But in Orlando during the holiday season, passenger traffic at OIA was the highest in the entire country. And that was before the vaccine. The vaccine had been discovered and approved, but nobody really received it. So that was the fact that people were flying this holiday season had nothing to do with the vaccine and everything to do with enough's enough. You know, I want to get back to living. And so as we move through 2021, the vaccine becomes more widely distributed. We're seeing new cases plunge right now around the country, certainly here in Florida. That pent-up demand squared is going to be unleashed. And the consumer, I think, powers this recovery through 2021. What about here in Florida? Well, we took it on the chin because of the impact on tourism that the pandemic had. You know, passenger traffic, as I mentioned, at OIA over the holiday weekend, highest in the country, was still down 42% versus the previous holiday season. So it's not like we're back to where we were. But in March and April, passenger traffic was down 97% year over year. So, I mean, basically shut down. So Florida, of course, tourism is a major sector in our economy. We took a big hit. But I think coming out of this, you know, we're going to rock it out. And I think the tourism industry will accelerate here in 2021. That, as I said, the vaccines were an important hurdle to cross. I think as we move through the year, once we get to the summer, it's going to start looking a lot more like things did pre-pandemic. I'm not going to say we'll be all the way back. I mean, these vaccines, are great for tourism, but it's not an adrenaline shot that's going to get tourism back to 100 million plus visitors the way it was pre-pandemic. But we are on the way back. Payrolls in Florida, I think, will continue to rise. The tourism sector is still struggling. I mean, they were in an incredibly deep hole. They have a much longer path to recovery. I think they'll recover with a lag to the overall economy as a whole. I think most industries should be back to pre-pandemic by the end of 2021. I think tourism might take into the first half of 2022 just because of how much damage was done. I think leisure travel will rebound much more quickly than the business side of things. I think the convention business, and I thrive in that, has an even longer recovery path than tourism. So the housing market. In Florida, these are sales monthly in blue, existing single family homes, red's the 12-month moving average. The numbers are still high, way above where we were at the height of the housing bubble. Prices continue to rise, and in many instances at a double-digit pace. And so now median prices, about $305,000 statewide, well above the $254,000 peak of the housing bubble. And so, that's a good, and there's some drawbacks here as well. But this is the latest report from the Florida Realtors, and you can see that for existing homes, sales are up 18% year over year. Prices are up over 15% year over year. Time on the market, 21 days before contract, 3 weeks. That's down over 52% versus a year ago. So why are prices rising so quickly? Why are things selling so quickly? Well, the bottom row kind of tells the answer to that question. Inventories are incredibly depleted. 1.6 months of supply in the existing single family space. And real estate economists will tell you need 6 months to 9 months of inventory if you've got a market that's balanced. This is a market that's way out of balance. It's what your realtors would call a seller's market. It's what your economics professor would say is a shortage in the housing market, and it's a severe shortage. And so that's why prices are rising as rapidly as they are. The bigger the shortage, the more pressure there is on price to rise. And what we don't have this time around, not that Trustco ever engaged in this kind of behavior, but banks are not just giving out mortgages to anybody that walks through the door. The borrowers that are borrowing at these historically low interest rates are highly qualified. And in fact, credit availability in the mortgage space actually tightened throughout 2020. So not only is there not money being thrown out to anyone that wants it, it's becoming more difficult to qualify for the mortgage. So this is a pure shortage situation. And again, I tried to ask you to prevent this, but you didn't listen to me. Maybe you will now, I don't know. No, now you're complaining about lumber prices, right? Well, lumber was cheap 5 years ago. You should have built that. Anyway, I don't even know why I show up. I'm wasting my time. 1.2 months here in the Orlando metro area. I mean, there's nothing. It's nothing. And you can see what prices are here, up 12.5% year over year. So the same problem, we're back to where we were in February. The same problem in housing is there's simply not enough. And so as prices are rising double-digit paces, affordability is becoming increasingly an issue. And so this is something we have to circle back on. Part of it, of course, is all your fault. But the other element is transportation networks in the region. You have to have transportation networks that can get workers from housing that is affordable to where there are jobs. And typically, look around the country, in the core of the metro area, that's where the jobs are. But housing is expensive there. So you have to go out further for less expensive housing. But you need transportation networks to get people to and from. So that's, we'll be back to that challenge as we come out of this recession here in Florida. Looking at the statewide unemployment rate, you can see what happened. It was just very dramatic spike in the unemployment rate to a level even above that previous record that we experienced during the Great Recession. And it was compressed. The unemployment rate rose fairly gradually over a number of years last recession. This unemployment rate spiked in a matter of weeks. And so, Florida always gets bashed in the national media. And it might be the whole Florida man stigma, I don't know. But Florida was being slammed about not being able to process unemployment insurance claims. But this was happening around the country, because there was no reason to build a system or to staff a department with the level and capacity to handle millions of claims in a matter of weeks, because that's not how the labor market works. So we had all those problems trying to get people processed, but the unemployment rate is falling very quickly. I think the gains going forward will be more gradual. It's easy to, turn the lights back on in some sectors of the economy, and the mall at Millennia is allowed to be open again. And so all these stores have to bring back workers. That's easy. But those stores, those businesses that didn't make it through that shutdown, those proprietors, their employees, they didn't just go back to work when the lights turned on, because the lights never did go back on there. And so now those resources, these people have to be shifted, into other endeavors in the economy, and that doesn't happen as quickly as if you could just turn it back on. GDP at the state level, again, you can just look at the dramatic swing here. This was an incredibly severe recession, with the height of the housing bubble and then just, lights out. But you look at the swings here, and it's so much more dramatic, and yet self-inflicted. I just think about these policies, and it reminds me of the movie The Fight Club. I don't know, maybe some of you ladies saw it on Valentine's weekend. It's the opposite of a chick flick, isn't it? Well, anyway, in this movie, if you haven't seen it, spoiler alert. Ed Norton's one of the lead characters, and you think he's getting into these fights with Brad Pitt, and they start these fight clubs all around the country, and they're beating the living crap out of each other. That's Fight Club. Don't talk about it once you leave here, of course. But well, it turns out that Edward Norton, there is no Brad Pitt. Edward Norton was just punching himself in the face. I guess he's nuts. And I guess we're nuts, because we punched ourselves in the face when we shut down the economy to try to stop a pandemic, which didn't work. I mean, it was like, they say history never repeats itself, but it rhymes, right? In the Middle Ages with the Black Plague, what did people do to try to prevent from getting it? Anybody know? To flagellate themselves, because they figured it was punishment for their sins. So if I just beat my back with this, spiky chain, maybe God won't give me the plague. We did the same thing. Well, if we shut down the economy, let's, economically flagellate ourselves. Maybe we can prevent this microbe from doing what it's going to do no matter what. I don't know. I'm sort of giving away my position on that, all right. Payroll employment, again, in Florida, we did the same shutdowns. Governor DeSantis opened up more quickly than a lot of places around the state. Of course, it was going to be a super spreader state, and, Dr. Death and everything, that didn't turn out. But it did help our economy recover more quickly. And we continue to reap those benefits. But tourism, as I said, still has a long way to go. And we lost some businesses along the way, these little salons, resale shops, and ice cream stores, in beach towns. They didn't have 2 months of cash to just float on. Disney, Delta Airlines, they were going to be at the other side of the pandemic. It's little people that were hurt by this, and it makes it all the more shameful. Payroll employment growth over the next 3 years, leisure and hospitality, again, that's growth from a depleted base, but I think as the vaccine continues to be distributed, and the trends in new infections rates continues to go down. As we're seeing, we're going to see some good growth there. White collar jobs continue to be strong. They were not typically impacted by the shutdown, right? If you could sit at a computer and do your job, you didn't lose your job. But if you had to be in a place or you're a hands-on person, you're the one that took the hit. Health, we continue to get older. Our population continues to grow. That population is skewed towards more older folks. Demand for health services will drive jobs in that sector as well. Population growth remains pretty good, despite everything that's been going on in 2020. And I think the census estimates put Florida at the #2 state in the country in terms of population gains in 2020. So, as far as the pandemic, I'm very leery of declarations about permanent changes coming about from transitory events. And so a lot of talk about, COVID-19 is changing everything. I don't know about that. I think the trends that were in place pre-COVID still remain in place. And one of those trends was solid population growth in the state. I think some of that growth last year were people saying, why would I stay in New York? I mean, I know 5 people that left New York City. Like, why would I stay there? You can't, all the reasons to be there were gone. You couldn't go to eat, couldn't go to a bar, couldn't go to a show. Why stay? Why pay this kind of exorbitant rent when I could just zoom in from Florida or Carolinas? So, payroll job growth, I think Florida will return again to being ahead of the national economy in terms of job growth. And I think we're well positioned. I think the fiscal situation in the state is so much better relative to many states in the Northeast, Illinois, California. And we're starting to see, at least anecdotally, companies bailing and coming to Florida. There was, I think Goldman Sachs announced they're moving some operations to South Florida. There's a hedge fund whose name escapes me that's completely moving operations from New York to South Florida. There's been talk recently of Disney, California, moving some of its operations to the Lake Nona area. It's real. And these states have tremendous problems with their pension systems, with deficit spending. And people are going to vote with their feet, and that's going to really add to the growth that's fueled by that. Here in Central Florida, I mean, we went from being one of the top economies in the country in terms of metros, one of the best job markets in the country, to being in pretty dire straits. And we still, I think Orange County is the #2 or 3 highest rate of unemployment in the entire state. Unemployment really surged, but when you shut down the major theme parks, when there's nobody coming to the airport, all those related and interconnected businesses, when there's no conventions at the convention center, that's a pretty big hit. And a lot of people lost their jobs in a very short amount of time. Output in the economy, again, if you say you're shut down, you can't produce. And when you can't produce, output falls. I mean, this is no mystery about this particular recession. But we will bounce back. The labor market will bounce back. I think the Orlando region, all those drivers, those trends that were in place pre-pandemic have not changed. Now it's just a matter of recovering from the pandemic and those associated policies, which I think will speed along as we go through 2021. And I think by 2022, we're kind of back, and this whole episode is in the rearview mirror. Personal income, you see it's kind of bouncing around wildly. That's from the various stimulus payments and the supplemental unemployment insurance that was paid out for a while. So when those go away, the year-over-year changes get a little bit goofy. So these declines don't really have anything to do with wages and salaries falling as an indication of a weak labor market, but really the expiration of some of the stimulus that was put in place. Job growth here the next 3 years. Again, I think we're going to outpace the state by and large. Leisure and hospitality, a lot of room to go in terms of employment in that sector. But kind of go down the list here. Things remain pretty strong. And, back in February of last year, we were in a pretty great position. We punched ourselves in the face in March and April, and, now we're waiting to recover from some of that damage. But the recovery is underway, and I think it will be accelerated and catalyzed because of the vaccine and the falling infection numbers. And I think the outlook for our region remains very strong. And with that, thank you very much for having me. I'll take some questions.
Capability of doing questions live here, and if you're listening through the Zoom feature, you can also submit your questions through the Q&A. So we'll monitor this, and
All right.
you can stay on stage to answer questions.
Sir,
I have 30 questions I'm gonna ask you.
how many you have? 30?
30.
Okay.
Yes, right?
Yeah. You buying the beers though?
No, you talked about the unemployment and where we are, regaining employment and the stimulus money and whatnot. So just anecdotally, what we're experiencing is a severe shortage of employees. Can you just opine on that? How do those two things work?
Right. I mean, so what's true for the economy as a whole is not necessarily true for each of the individual parts, right? So the overall economy may still have high levels of unemployment, but you can zoom down to specific sectors, construction, for instance, where there are shortages of labor. So that doesn't really change the big picture. And so, what's true for the whole isn't always true for the sum of the parts either. So, that there can be variation among sectors. But again, had you listened to me, you could have trained these people up 5-6 years ago. We had plenty of inventory. You could have upgraded your yacht by now. And now you're still stuck with a 60-footer. Sorry, should have listened to this. Is that it?
Yeah. I mean, the issue we're seeing is like, even in the hospitality and service industry, like a restaurant.
Yeah.
My brother-in-law has a restaurant. He can't find anyone to work in his restaurant. My wife has a medical practice. She can't find anyone to work in her medical practice. It's on all ends. It's not finding.
Right. Well, again, recessions, do not, and this one in particular, do not uniformly impact the economy, right? We don't see 5% job loss here, 5% job loss here, 5% job. This time around, most of the job loss, big chunk of it was in leisure and hospitality, right? So I don't know about the restaurant. There should be some warm bodies out there still, but because you're a good sous chef doesn't mean you're going to be able to wire a house. So labor's not completely fungible.
So Doc, the cynic in me is saying the stimulus money is keeping people at home. No?
Well, there's some truth to that. I've talked to many people that said they're making more money not working than they were making when they were working. When you throw in $1,200 plus some money for the kids, plus you're getting an extra $600 a week from the feds for on top of your unemployment payment. But at the same time, there are people that I'm sure would be happy to go back to work, and these things are going to expire at some point. And the unemployment in leisure and hospitality, you look at the hotels and look at their capacity, the restaurants, they're open back up, but are they really, experiencing the same sort of pre-pandemic level of activity? And the answer is just no, So these things can, many of us either personally or have had friends that, say, I'll look for a job when my unemployment comes out. It does, it affects incentives. So that may be some of what's going on there. Some of them may have left the industry too, right? We saw the same thing in construction post 2008, 2009. They're like, I'm a bartender. I can't, it's not like I could go to another bar. They're all shut down. Maybe I need to do something else. So maybe we need a tourism to construction pipeline. And that's the initiative bill we should be working on now. We go out there and start rounding up people by visiting, take them to undisclosed location and teach them how to weld. Yeah.
With the demand for consumer goods going up, why is manufacturing still flat or
And we're talking about that. I've been waiting for an under-the-counter microwave for 3.5 months right now. You know, I think supply chains got disrupted and maybe have not become full, because, you know, every country's got their own policies here, right? And they're all doing different things in terms of lockdowns and restrictions, what you can do, where you can go, you know, how you can travel. And so I think that the global supply chain, excuse me, is still disrupted. And you know, demand's bouncing back very quickly, but the supply side of that equation is not able to recover very quickly, right? I mean, if suddenly the number of passengers who were flying on airplanes in February decided today that they all wanted to fly as well, there wouldn't be enough capacity for them. Because those planes that got parked, you can't just you know, pull off the canvas and, you know, jumpstart the battery and off you go. You know, there are lags here, and I'm sure that's true through, you know, many industries, especially raw materials, you know.
Sean, we have a question through Zoom. It's right there on the screen. We can read it out loud.
Oh. How will the interruption in the supply chain affect the overall pace of recovery? It might slow it. Well, we were just talking about that, right? You know, I think that could be a bit of a bottleneck here until this capacity comes back online. And again, the global interconnectivity makes things more complex, because now you've got a tapestry of different public health approaches and, you know, lockdowns or not lockdown, you know, I mean, even among European Union, you had a lot of different paths being taken in how to approach this. So I think that that's a temporary thing. You know, I think that will be worked out, but demand is certainly growing, and I think we'll continue to.
Yeah, the forecast looks really strong, right? As we move on over the next 2 or 3 years.
It did last year, didn't it?
Yeah. Well, I guess the question is, you know, with the recent changes in Washington, policy changes,
Yeah.
how can that affect that growth, and what, can they really screw it up?
Well, I wrote about this in our first quarter U.S. forecast, which has not been released, but the headline of that section and subsequent discussion is that you know, pandemic, not policy, will drive 2021. And so what I meant by that is, you know, this is all about coming out of the pandemic and coming out of the lockdown. That's what's going on right now. There's nothing that's been done majorly in Washington, D.C. that's shaping 2021 at this point. Get beyond 2021, well, of course. You know, what we've seen now are executive orders. These need to stop. I mean, this is not what our system is built on. But anyway, the indication from these is that the legislation that might be forthcoming will probably look similar to what we saw in 2008, 2016, that time frame. You know, I think more push for the green energy. I think more regulatory activity. And you know, that recovery for the first 7 or 8 years was the weakest in U.S. history.
Yeah, it didn't help.
It didn't help. So I think these policies will tend to dampen growth if they're passed. I don't know. I mean, the one thing I will say about Democrats is, you know, there's nobody, there are no defectors when it comes to voting on things, right? So they have the executive, they have Congress, they have the Senate. So they can do what they want. And they typically all vote in lockstep. So will we see a Green New Deal? I don't know. This latest stimulus isn't moving very quickly, but you know, we're still impeaching and trying to prevent people from being buried in Arlington, you know, important stuff. But yeah, all while the little people suffer, right? All while these housekeepers that haven't gotten their jobs back on iDrive or at the theme parks are struggling, and their families are struggling. I mean, it's no politics. I want to keep my job. Sure.
I'd like to piggyback off this question and talk about the migration, people moving from states like New York or California. And we've already seen it in other states like Colorado, Arizona, and Texas. So how worried do we need to be that they're bringing their voting policies to our state and they're going to continue to vote for the same things that they're trying to leave?
But no politics.
I got kids that are gonna put in college. But believe me, I don't have any of the skills to work for any of you folks, so I don't know what else you do. Well, I can spin the signs at your building sites. I probably do. Still have a little of my old basketball. Yeah, you know, I guess the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. I would hope that if you're leaving, maybe they just don't see, I don't know. You know, if you're fleeing something for a reason, why would you want that same thing to occur in your new home? It seems counterintuitive, but I don't know. You know, people change. And I think, you know, it's interesting politically, you know, to see in this election, you know, the share of the Hispanic vote that Trump got, right, was much higher than anybody would have expected. But there's a segment of that populace that says, you know, some of these policies that the Democrats are talking about remind me of, you know, insert South American country here. And so people, yeah, I'm hopeful that people learn and realize that, you know, there's limits to what government can do. There really is. And we're never going to get a utopia here on earth. I mean, there's no policies, there's no party that's going to deliver that. You know, I think, you know, do no harm, right? I mean, that isn't that part of the Hippocratic Oath? Do no harm. That should be the first statement of government officials. Just do no harm. But we'll see.
Last question.
You haven't touched on taxes, what you wonderful economists are seeing with our new regime and what they will be coming up with. I have seen something recently, or read something recently, that they're actually looking at 401ks, trying to figure out how to get money out of that. Do you have any comments on?
Yes, taxes are going up. I guarantee that. Right? They're not going down. $27.5 trillion debt. No, you know, there's no budget debates in Washington, D.C. When's the last time, you know, there's a debate over budget priorities? I mean, we've been running government by continuing resolution. Oh, throw in this, throw in that. Oh, we got to get one more vote. Okay, here comes some money for this, and then off we go. Deficits continue to rise. You know, I mean, it was not good pre-pandemic. You know, the deficits were going back up towards $1 trillion a year. You know, now we're 3 trillion plus. But will DC sort of say, you know, we should just scale back a little bit here. We need to pare down things. You know, maybe we don't need as many agencies or buildings. You know, we don't need to continue to be in Afghanistan and Iraq, you know, for 20 years here, spending all that money. That's not going to happen. So they're like, where can we get more money? And you know, we'll see an undoing of some of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act for sure. And then there'll be these new types of taxes, you know, transaction, you know, 401k withdrawal privilege fee. So when you take money out of your 401k, you pay for that privilege. It's not, maybe not a tax, but it's the same thing. So yeah, you know, you can, there's two ways to eliminate a deficit and pay down debt. You either have more tax revenue than you're spending, and you can achieve that by raising tax revenue or cutting spending. And we know which way the wind blows, right? Was that Dylan song? You don't need to be a weatherman to know which way the wind blows in Washington, D.C., that's for sure. Anyway, thank you so much for having me.
Always a lot of education and laughs whenever Dr. Sean Snape is with us. So thank you so much for his time and coming in person to be with us today. And for those of you joining us on Zoom, thank you. And once again, just a recap of our sponsors for today's event. Want to thank all of our corporate partners, Dave Schmidt Engineering, Trustco Bank, Allied Building Solutions, Central Kitchen and Bath, Cassie Associates, FDS Engineering, CenturyLink, and James Hardy for your sponsorship for today's program. Be well, stay safe, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.